Welcome to CMC. I'm Mindy Wright, a member of CMC's Board of Trustees, and I'm also Senior Outreach Coordinator at Ohio State. It's really good to see everybody here today. Today, the Columbus Metropolitan Club presents Childhood Needs to Succeed, a measure for Franklin County, sponsored by PNC, who's represented here today by many of their friends and associates. Let's take a moment to thank them. For many of us in the room today, our basic needs, food, shelter, clothing, a safe and warm place to sleep, we take those things for granted. For others, these necessities of a healthy life are not a given. For too many in Franklin County, getting even the bare minimum of life's necessities is a daily struggle. How can anyone succeed in life when they have to worry about finding food or a safe place to rest? Let's turn to our experts to discuss this in our community context. So please help me welcome Joy Bivens, Director of Franklin County Department of Jobs and Family Services. Steve Ives, CEO of YMCA of Central Ohio. Lisa Golden, Early Childhood Mental Health Supervisor at Nationwide Children's Hospital. CEO of Action for Children, Eric Karolak. And Executive Director of ThoughtWell, Lynette Cook. Lynette will start us with an overview of the data, and then Eric will take the podium to lead the conversation. Lynette, the podium's yours.
Great, thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. It's nice to see all your smiling faces. Thanks, as always, to the CMC for convening this conversation and then allowing us to be a part of it. Many, many thanks to the many, many funders of the Franklin County Youth Needs Assessment Birth to Age 12, who were responsible for the report that kind of underlies this conversation. Those funders include Action for Children, the Franklin County Department of Job and Family Services, Franklin County Children's Services, Future Ready Columbus, the OSU Early Head Start Program, the United Way of Central Ohio, the YMCA of Central Ohio, and the Columbus Foundation. I wasn't kidding, a lot of funders. Thank you to all of them. I'm also pleased to share the floor today with Eric, Steve, Joy, and Lisa, and I so appreciate your willingness to bring your expertise to the table to have a conversation about some of the stuff that we learned in the report. I want to thank the team at ThoughtWell, of course, for all of your great work. All right, so let me jump in and get to the report. Some of you, there's a full PDF of the report on our website at thoughtwell.org, as well as on the websites for Action for Children, the Y, and Franklin County Department of Job and Family Services, I believe. So please check that out. Those of you who were registered for this luncheon as of this morning should hopefully also have received an email this morning with a few slides. Those slides are sort of going to help guide the conversation. Just my brief part this morning. We thought if I was going to give you a lot of numbers, I needed to at least give you something to use as a reference point. All of those infographics are also in the full report. If you get the full report from our website, again, thoughtwell.org, you can also find attachments referenced in the full report that include the resource matrix, the child care profiles by district and by zip code. So those are additional resources for you. Let's see. All right, so let me get into the heart of the matter. This research was conducted from April of 2016 to May of 2017. Yes, it took us a little over a year. Did I mention there were a lot of funders involved? Lots of people, right? It was a great thing, but over the course of that time, we were able to conduct 2 stakeholder meetings with service providers who work with kids. We had nearly 100 different people discussing challenges, gaps in services, resources, emerging and best practices, and priorities for different age groups. And the kids were grouped from birth to age 3, 4 and 5-year-olds, and 6 to 12-year-olds. There were 4 focus groups and an interview with out-of-school providers, early education teachers, healthcare professionals, housing providers, and a parent. That was the interview. To gain a deeper perspective on all of these issues, Secondary data and mapping provided spatial analysis for Franklin County overall and by school district and zip code. A resource matrix was developed identifying what's currently available using program elements from the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act. Did I get that right? And categorizing programs with age, target audience, and location information. Early education profiles were created at the zip code and school district level with localized child population and education data. And finally, a gap analysis, pulling information from each of these tasks and synthesizing that into a concise summary of key strengths and opportunities for improvement for the 4 thematic areas, which include family and life, childcare and education, health and wellness, and social emotional development. So a lot of information, a lot of great people involved in this project. We were thrilled to be a part of it. So let me jump in. For those of you who called up that slide, either printed it or called it up on one of your devices, I'm now looking at slide 1. What we found, more than 2/3 of parents reported that their child's school does very well or well at school planning, leadership, and volunteer opportunities. There are more data points in there, but let me reiterate that parents are saying positive things about their schools. Community members were particularly concerned with social emotional health of young children, mentioning things like a rise in tween and teen suicide, lack of parental involvement in addressing behavioral and social emotional issues in their children, and a perceived rise in preschool suspensions and expulsions. Let me say that again. Preschool suspensions and expulsions. I had to stop when I first read that in the report. What's going on for preschool kids in their life that their behavior is such that they're at risk of suspension or expulsion at a preschool level? Wow. But I have a lot more data to talk about, so we can't even stop there. A big challenge is the lack of childcare options with extended hours. So while nearly 40% of providers offer after-hours care, just under 11% actually provide care for second and third shift. Nearly 36% of parents with a child in childcare reported that they didn't qualify for government assistance, and yet they struggle to afford childcare. And of course, we have to talk about poverty. 13% of families in Franklin County live at or below poverty, compared to 11% statewide. That jumps to just over 20% for families with kids under 18, and 45.2% of female-headed households with kids living at home. So that's from a family perspective, but now let's just think about the kids. Thinking about poverty from the perspective of just children, 25% of children overall between the ages of 6 and 11 live in poverty. That's 1 in 4. And the disparity is even more shocking. 44.7% of African American children between the ages of 6 and 11 are living in poverty, compared to 37.2% of Hispanic Latino children and 15% of white children. There's actually a map, and we're now on page 3 of the slide deck. It's also page 4 of the report. There's a map of where poverty is most prevalent in our community. Unfortunately, many of you are not going to be surprised to learn that 4 zip codes in our community have 30% or higher of families in that zip code living at poverty. An additional 8 zip codes, that percentage is above 20%. Those zip codes are most of them are directly surrounding downtown, either on the east or the south side. All right, slide 4. I know I'm going really fast through a lot of data, but I only have a couple more minutes. All right, slide 4. 111 licensed childcare providers responded to our provider survey. Among them, 55.5% reported having step up to quality rating of 1 star or higher. But only 50.8% of those report having 3 stars or higher, which I'm not going to get into definitions, but 3 stars or higher is somehow quality, and that's a good thing, and they'll explain that in a minute. All right. Note that this is actually based on the provider responses, and we're actually currently working with Job and Family Services to do a more comprehensive look at child care providers and where we are in terms of those quality ratings. 53% of our survey respondents who have yet to get 3 stars have a plan. So half of them who aren't there yet at least have a plan, but 31% don't have a plan in place, and 15.6% weren't sure if they had a plan. Again, I'll let the experts talk about that in a minute. Inadequate staffing and insufficient finances were the most cited barriers to obtaining step up to quality star rating. The report contains a number of maps for a deeper dive into where families with very young children live, where child care providers are located, both in total and then only those with step up to quality ratings, ratios of potential demand to supply under different scenarios, and a heat map of median distance traveled from home to the child care provider for kids under 6. I suspect the panelists will have much to say about child care in terms of access, affordability, and transportation. And then finally, slide 5. For the older kids, the good news is that 71% of 6th graders scored proficient or above in math, and 75.3% in English language arts. Of course, the other side of that is, what about the remaining quarter of them? When findings are viewed alongside the poverty map, the highest performing districts, like Dublin, Grandview, and Upper Arlington, also have among the lowest poverty rates. And because I can't skip over health and wellness entirely, let me just share that 56.4% of parents responding to our survey reported that their children ate fruit and vegetables 3 or more times a day. Yay, Steve, that's a good thing, right? We need that number to be higher. Okay, so there's so much more to share. It was nearly impossible to pick out the best bits to mention, and I'm probably slightly over my 7 minutes, so I hope you'll get yourself a copy of the full report and spend some time with it. It's really interesting data, I promise it is. And I look forward to hearing our panelists' reflection on what they read in the report. Thanks very much.
Good morning or good afternoon, and thank you, Lynette. You and your team did a great job with a really complicated project. You know, I'm sure you all know that for nonprofits and government agencies, needs assessments are akin to market analyses for for-profit concerns. They're how we know our programming is what's needed to meet the needs of our consumers, of our clients, of our communities, and what we need to do to change that programming. Many of us turn to Thoughtwell for our needs assessments, and it occurred to me, as I heard that occurring, that maybe we could look to the common elements of our needs assessments and turn to Thoughtwell in a way that might be both, that would be collective and would both benefit sort of the resource efficiency and help us break down some of the silos in our sector so we could identify cross currents that would helpfully promote innovative programming. And all those funders, Lynette went out and worked with each of us, producing a product that is thought-provoking. It doesn't answer all the questions. We have other questions that weren't part of that common selection. And also, a good report should generate more questions. You should leave here wondering about more, because we have so much more to find out. And I'm glad to know that we have partners in the community at the United Way, the Columbus Foundation, who are doing other assessments that will help us figure out how the pieces of the puzzle fit together. You know, finding out how those pieces fit together, and I don't know what the last puzzle piece is, it's not this one, but finding out how those puzzle pieces fit together is never been more important, more critical. Especially if Columbus is to truly be America's opportunity city. There are so many facets to poverty. Housing, Michelle, food insecurity, employment. And every one of them is important, but if we're to get ourselves out ahead of poverty in the future, in 2020, 2025, and 2030, I believe there's no more important place for us to keep our attention and focus than with the needs of youth, young children 0 to 12 particularly, which is the focus of the needs assessment. You know, this month, a child was taken to child care for the first time in his life. And later today, preschoolers will be learning letters and numbers. And this afternoon at lunch, there's a gaggle of kids just can't wait to get to their after-school enrichment program. You know, for those kids, the future is now. You might have gone to a preschool graduation this past summer. Joy, I know we did. And that preschool graduating class, they were the high school class of 2030. So the future is now for this population. And it's on that note that I'd like to turn to our panel of experts. We'll begin with a broad brush. We talked about, were there any surprises in the report? But you know, for us, so many of these things are things we're familiar with. I'd like to ask you if there were things that intrigued you, really piqued your interest, you wanted, maybe developed more questions for you as you worked with Lynette, the team, and the other funders. Joy, would you like to lead us off?
Absolutely. When Lynette actually mentioned the expulsion and the suspension of preschoolers, like you paused on that, right? What does a little person being potty trained, still in diapers, what did they do that qualified them to be suspended or expelled? It actually causes me to pause because I not just look at the child, I look at the family in the household. What's going on in the household that would cause this type of behavior, if it's normal or not normal, for an educator to deem this child to be suspended or expelled? So that surprised me.
I think I was equally surprised by how much that was there, but not so much from our experience. So I think as I've talked with our staff team about what we've experienced over the past summer and the past years, there's been a huge uptick in the behavioral challenges that we have. And I can tell you that my first reaction when I hear that a young person is having to leave one of our programs is to say, no, we can't do that. And our biggest challenge, as you've alluded to, has been working with the families, because mom and dad will come in and many times are not helpful or productive in helping us resolve that problem. So I think it's an intriguing part of this. I think we've pulled it out a little bit. I think another piece that's really intriguing to me is the access concept, the idea of is there enough childcare or not? I think that's an important question for us to figure out as a community and as a group of providers. And if there are pockets where there aren't enough access, or there isn't enough access, I think there's some really interesting opportunities for us to work together to help make that happen.
And likewise, I'm actually not surprised by the preschool expulsion rates and the increase in expulsions in our community. What the report really brings together is those reasons why that is an issue: the high poverty rates, the parenting in the homes, the lack of mental health services. So I'm curious more about the trauma. Trauma is introduced in the report as being one of those concerns with families in our communities. So I want to hear more from the families, more from providers and their understandings of their families.
We often talk about trying to get upstream on these issues, and childhood trauma is definitely an area I think that we should do more and more work on, if it be protecting kids from child sexual abuse or physical abuse or neglect, finding ways as a community, as a society, to create safer spaces and safer environments for kids is really important to me, and I think ultimately will make the difference in the long run.
I think at Job and Family Services, one of the things we're doing now is being more innovative as it relates to our funding dollars to address some of the core issues that we're seeing as it relates to trauma. Just recently, we approved some dollars for FCFC, the Family First Council, to do a program in Columbus City schools as it relates to building better lives. And what they're doing is they are training staff and equipping staff and support staff on what trauma is and how to be better equipped in dealing with children who are dealing with adverse childhood experiences.
I'm so glad that families came up front and center right off the bat. This is not scripted, as you can tell, and they are really the core of this. We begin with our work with families and the children in them, of course. I don't want to lose sight of childcare, because for so many families, children are out of home for a long period of time. You know, nationally, the average is 36 hours a week, and about 2/3 of children. So, Steve, you brought up the idea of supply, and maybe we should begin with defining what childcare is and how we understand quality in those settings. And Joy, I know, Director Bivens, you are responsible for a lot of the funding and work with the state in Step Up to Quality, that program that we are working with in Action for Children as well. Maybe that would be a good place to begin that conversation about supply, to actually look at what are the measures of quality in early childhood.
So I'm going to pause on that one. I see Rhonda Johnson in the room, who is a part of Columbus City, as well as the Future Ready partnership that we have. When we look at quality, so in 2014 in the governor's budget, there was some legislation that was written stating that centers now, early learning centers now, must be Step Up to Quality certified. And what Step Up to Quality certification basically is, it is a 5-star rating system. Each star signifies a level of quality and commitment on the provider, safety, parent engagement, hiring quality staff. So whereas before, when my children went to school, I like to explain things in 4th grade level, so I hope that doesn't offend anyone. I know you heard all the data, but when my children went to school, it was an early learning center, applied to be an early learning center through the state, and they went through the inspections and that type of thing. Now the state and the Ohio Department of Job and Family Services, in addition to the Ohio Department of Education, they are enforcing or administering the Step Up to Quality standard, meaning, your center should have some type of system in place that deems it quality. So that quality, again, is measured by the teachers that you hire. Do they have degrees? Safety, parent engagement, those types of things. And when we ask, do we have enough quality care? I moved the ball on this one. Rhonda will probably tell you something different, as well as my colleagues, because I always wonder, when currently we have about 32,000 children that receive publicly funded child care in Franklin County, 32,000. So if today was 2020, 28,000 children would lose their publicly funded child care slots, because that's how many publicly funded child care centers are star rated. Let that sink in. So you would assume the 28,000 could then say, oh, we'll just find another center. You can't find another center because there's not enough centers, again, that are star rated. So do we have enough access? We have a lot of centers. We have home providers, we have early learning centers, but in the parent's perspective, do we have centers that are open after 5 o'clock? Do we have centers that can assist with kids who are special needs? Do we have the infrastructure in place? There's a shortage of Step Up to Quality centers. We have about 964, I believe, currently in Franklin County. But again, I'm kind of iffy on that one, because when we look at the standard now going into 2020, we do not have enough Step Up to Quality centers to engage these children. So my answer on that is no.
And Steve, the YMCA is one of the largest providers of child care in our community. What's your sense in terms of the volume, the supply? Is it sufficient to meet demand? Is it at the right level of quality? What are you seeing in your programs?
I think a thing to note is that we're a pretty large organization with more resources than many others, and it's still a chore for us. It's still a challenge for us to imagine getting all of our centers to the quote-unquote star ratings. And I think the reality is that there are so many other centers out there that some of them may be able to be lifted up. And I think it's a place where we as partners, as colleagues, as community citizens need to think about how do we help them get there. You ask any parent who has their child in a decent child care center and they've had them there for a little while, they're going to say it's a quality child care center. The staff love me. I love the staff. It's clean. It's safe. My child comes home happy. And I think that this notion of quality, we might need to tip it on its ear a little bit and suggest that this is about being qualified. These are qualification levels in terms of getting kids kindergarten ready and having them emotionally and socially prepared to be in the schools, because sometimes I think it's going to be intimidating for some of the centers that believe themselves to be running a good center to jump onto this bandwagon of doing all the work entailed, and also the resources to help them move down that path are going to be a challenge for us. But I think the reality is that there's a lot of capacity, that isn't at the level that we want and need it to be in order for our children to really get what they want and need out of their education.
I took a quick look at the Action for Children table, and a lot of nods there, because we work with over 200 programs on an average week, and there is a lot of surprise when folks find out just where they are when you look to other measures. But that's for just regular childcare, and the average child, the median, if you want to call it that. Lisa, your program is on the ground, working day to day with programs and with children who present with very different experiences. So does Step Up matter in that regard? Is that its own unique additional problem, or what would you say on that?
Well, when we work with providers, we find that there are just so many demands. And so the centers have their best intentions, directors and teachers really want to do the best for children in our community, but they feel the struggle of trying to keep up all the mandates. The director is also having to cook and having to pick up children for the after-school runs. They can't sit down and sometimes meet with us. We want to meet with teachers and be able to share the information that we have on how they can help support these children. But the demands of some of the other initiatives that they're in, there really is burdensome at times, and they have best intentions. And we go into centers and say, like, no, they don't have 3 or 4 or 5 stars, but the children are happy. They're loved, they're well taken care of, they're learning, they're engaged. And so it is hard. Like you said, I agree. I like the point Steve saying that you qualified. It's a way of qualifying the center, because they're getting quality care. They're getting a quality care, but how do we help support those centers who are not star rated to kind of just go to the next step?
The reality is the technical capacity needed by our staff who work in front line with children is very different today than it was 10 years ago, with the behavioral issues that are going on and with our expectations and what we now know about early childhood education and preparing kids to be prepared. And they're some of the lowest paid people in our community. And I think that's something we need to keep putting out there. It's all at varying degrees, but the teachers who are working directly with children are not having the same kind of salaries that engineers are having, who are doing great work too. I don't want to diminish any of that. But if we're really serious about this, I think we got to find ways through funding resources, through collaborations, through partnerships, through just sheer force of will to find ways to make it a competitive wage to be in that field and a valued wage that tells those teachers that the qualifications we expect of them are worth their time and effort to get them.
Amen.
Absolutely.
So I don't want to have our conversation go to talk about separate pockets of children, because in any program you have all children, and in any family you also have children who present in all sorts of ways. But we know that Columbus is, among many of our strengths, is that we are a center for new Americans. And we have many children in our public school systems in Franklin County who are English as a second language learners. What does the report shed light on, or what do your experiences with your programs suggest are some of the needs in our community for addressing their special circumstances?
Since I went first, I'm going to let you go.
You're gonna let me go? It gets back to the comment I just made. What a different technical skill set needed by a teacher to be able to have the cultural competence, to be able to handle the diversity of the people and the experiences that they're having, and the parents in particular, who come with all different norms and expectations about how they deal with discipline or how they deal with children. It's a high level of competency that's necessary. I think that, one of the things that we're doing as an organization is a deep commitment to diversity and inclusion initiatives and to cultural competency amongst our staff. We opened a new American Welcome Center at our North Y, all signals to those communities that we're open and available and wanting to be serving them. But it's far too little, in my opinion, and I think that it's a huge challenge for all of us to make sure that we're keeping up with the pace of diversification. And I haven't seen a mosaic that wasn't beautiful. So this diversification of children in our programs is a beautiful thing. Yeah. And I think we've got to find ways together to make sure we take advantage of that and put it to good use.
Right. And I also think, just as far as Franklin County is concerned, we fund a lot of programs as it relates to workforce for new American citizens, new immigrants, that population, and working with families and parents. In addition to the after-school programs and the other enrichment activities that we fund, we really want to work with the parents so that they are equipped and they're able to navigate in the community so they can be successful, so that we don't have children experiencing the trauma on the back end, because these children experience trauma as well, right? So we want to make sure that we're working with those families as well, and that's why we have the New American Collaborative, where we assist families in entering into the workforce by providing employability services. And that collaborative is made up of several partners, and I'm going to butcher their names, so I'm not even going to mention it. I'm sure it's on our website.
And I'd just like to add, their early childhood programs really struggle with some of the basic understandings of many of the cultures that are in Columbus. That diversity is beautiful, the various languages. While we want to provide them education and training on how to engage families, having that bridge of communication is not always there. Having basic interpreting services. Many of our centers have families they can't communicate with. So how do you help understand their cultural norms at home to be able to bring that into the center when you have no way and no means of being able to even communicate with mom or dad to bring that home and school connection there?
I think we have to recognize that by virtue of being new Americans or not white, they come with some trauma that comes naturally from all of that, especially in the world that we live in today.
And with lack of supports.
Yes. And
lack of
You're away from your family or away from your natural setting, you don't have the same support that you might have.
It's an additional burden. One of the items in the report, which I really do hope you go to the website, look at the data, is a heat map, a fact sheet set of maps that identify what resources are available in what communities. And you really see that the child care shortage answer, there really isn't one for Franklin County or for the city of Columbus. There's one that's sort of neighborhood by neighborhood, and I mean neighborhood like the street I grew up on neighborhood. You see that a little bit where New Americans are in our community. Can you talk a little bit about what your agencies do, what programs, what your experiences in working with programs have been about the neighborhood by neighborhood nature of the needs of 0 to 12 youth? Mayor likes to talk about having 3 priorities, right? Mayor Ginther says neighborhoods, neighborhoods, neighborhoods. Much of your programming turns out in different ways in different communities.
There's an organization called ETSS that we've engaged with, I serve on the board of, and our staff team is really connected with, primarily for that very reason, because we know that they understand those neighborhoods and they can be relevant and can relate with them. I think we've got to find those opportunities like that and hold up those agencies that have that particular skill set that can help us figure that out, because it's not a skill set I would say that we particularly have.
One of the things we're doing right now currently is when we look at the 350,000 customers that we service, we're trying to break down the data in a way so that we know who these customers are, how many women, how many men, what are the demographics of these families, and then we're going to cross-reference that with the contracts that we put on the street. Because we want to make sure that the families have access to the contracts that we're putting on the street, and they're more targeted. And there's elimination of barriers, whether it's transportation, whether it's ESL services. So as far as when we look at, services, neighborhood by neighborhood, we put about $30 million on the street. 16 million of that is in education or in the childhood space. After-school programs, enrichment programs. We also, we do the summer youth jobs. We work with the Workforce Development Board. I see Lisa Pat McDaniel here, with the older youth. But, we don't believe we have been concentrated on looking at neighborhoods. Again, as we look at the trauma-informed care work that we're doing with Columbus City, there are about 5 or 6 schools we're working with right now in the nearest east side. But since we're trying to diversify the county and touch the county, it's not neighborhood specific.
Before we go on, I noticed 12:55, and that's the usual time to remind you that CMC's tradition is to include audience questions. We have mics, a mic present, and there it is, yes. So if you would begin thinking of your questions and moving toward the mic, we'll wrap up with a few questions here. Lisa, you were?
I just wanted to add, the Nationwide Children's also is very committed to the area surrounding the hospital. They have an initiative called the Healthy Neighborhoods, Healthy Families Program, working to improve the quality of the health and the well-being of children and families in that area of the surrounding the hospital, with some mentorship opportunities, working in the local schools there. offering medical and nursing staff in the schools, and being able to really help address the needs of the family. There's workforce development opportunities, and there's pre-K and kindergarten services that we're offering in those schools. So that really focusing in that needed area.
And the investment in Nationwide Children's Hospital in those zip codes has really been very, very critical to the community. Steve, you have an interesting initiative in Linden. That was the first neighborhood the city tackled, so to speak, here recently.
Yeah, so we're honored to be partnered with Battelle, who has selected us as a lead agency to do something really unique, which is different for the Y. We're not going in and opening a childcare center. We're not going in and building a building. We are finding linkages in that area and ways in which we can enhance other investments or other assets that are being created there. And so we tackled early childhood development first, and by identifying the number of centers that weren't star rated or didn't have their staff on the training path for that, and partnered with your agency, and your staff have been wonderful to go out and work directly on the streets with those families and with those providers to help move them down that path. So it was a signal that the community cares and that this matters, and we're going to put some resources behind helping other child care centers elevate their game and become more qualified to have kids ready for school when they get into kindergarten.
Can I make a statement really quick? Going back to the trauma that we see children experiencing, we as adults, many times when we read the newspaper, we look at data and it says homelessness is at this rate, food instability is at this rate. When I see those numbers, I see kids immediately, because if I'm having a bad day, I can just have a bad day. But if I go home and there's no food in my refrigerator, my car breaks down, I lose my home, that affects my children. So it's magnified times 10 when we talk about the issues that we as adults face. And I think one of the things as a community that we can do a better job of, and I know that I actually sit on the White House City School Board as well, is as adults, is start mentoring families, getting engaged in families' lives, not just with kids. Kids need mentors, of course, and we need as many mentors as possible. And I know, Dan Good, you're looking at me like, amen, we do, right? All of our school districts do, right? We need everyone that is able to mentor. But we also need people because it doesn't cost to care. So if you see a family struggling, if you know that someone, you come across someone at your church or, in the community and things they seem to be struggling a little bit, we're at a point now, and I believe in our society, where we need to start engaging in other people's lives that have nothing to do with us so that we can lift them up.
Mm-hmm. That's an excellent point. Thank you. Yeah, please. Joy, I'm an early childhood guy, so I need to stretch my mind sometimes. You brought up mentoring. We tend to think of that as school agers. And earlier, you also talked about enrichment programs, summer camps. You want to talk a little bit more about opportunities in that, and Steve, of course, your organization as well, opportunities for the older children in this needs report, say the 6 to 12 population?
So I don't study all of our contracts, so you're going to have to excuse me. So don't hold me to the numbers. So right now we have after-school programs again that we fund, and that are in our elementary schools. You see some in Columbus as well as our other districts. In addition to, there are programs that we do in the summertime, our summer youth camps. So our summer youth camps, we provide about 2,300 kids in the summertime an opportunity to attend a summer youth camp, whether it's through Big Brothers Big Sisters, whether it's, the Boys and Girls Club, whether it's through the camp out in Delaware, and can't remember their name right now because I was there with Commissioner Boyce recently. But there's so many different types of camps that each child is able to experience, and we also have them in the neighborhoods as well. So when I look at the older youth, that's our space. It is the after-school programs, it is the summer camp opportunities for kids.
When they're out of school time.
When they're out of school, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So the first community that I served, Portland, Maine, as a youth program director at a YMCA there, one of the things that came out of that community was a very large foundation that chose to make sure that summer camp was available for every fifth grader in that community. And so they made that commitment. Every fifth grader family got a $1,000 voucher that they could use to send their kid to or pay for camp at any one of the other centers. The beautiful thing about that was there were a lot more camps that started opening up, right? That's a lot of opportunity. And so it incentivized us to grow our summer camps. And I've mentioned this to many funders in this community in hopes that someday something along those lines might take seed, because how powerful might that be if every kid, regardless of, not just the poor kids, every kid was incentivized to have that camp experience. I happen to believe in it. I grew up in the camping world, that the magic that happens during the summer months, we can't put a price tag on it, because without that, there's kids sitting doing nothing and losing learning, and all the math is there to tell us all of that. But I think there's a great opportunity for this community to rally around that notion of making access to summer camp experiences for every fifth grader a possibility.
And I think this summer, our commissioners, and I wanted to make sure I mentioned them, our commissioners have been very intentional about providing opportunities for youth in the older space so they do not lose those, as much as possible, those skills, the math, the reading. So we presented a plan. They were very blunt in telling me to make sure that our summer camps are at capacity this summer, so each kid had an opportunity to be in a summer camp.
That's great leadership. And we should note the county also spearheaded the first youth needs assessment, which looked at children 13 to 24, I believe it was. So we now have a comprehensive 0 to 24 needs assessment package made possible through the county and other funders and the work of Thoughtwell. We're at that point where we should be turning to the audience for questions. We want this to be a dialogue, and I see a nice group of folks lined up. So, Arisha.
Hello. So my name is Arisha Hunter, and Eric has probably kind of lent out that I'm one of his staff at Action for Children. I oversee our SPARK program, and it is a home visiting kindergarten readiness program. We're one of several agencies within the city of Columbus who run this program. I noticed in the report that there was some data that focused on the significance, or at least highlighted that there are several different types of early childhood opportunities or avenues for a child to be ready for school, one of which are home visiting programs. And so I wondered how deep did this group get into focusing on alternative types of school readiness programs. So when I say alternative, I'm thinking of things like home visiting programs, things that are not in home or early childhood-based centers. And if you've done some work and if you've seen the significant impact, is there any work or any kind of talk about how to expand? Our focus in SPARK really is to make sure that our children are ready for school. So the curriculum that we use follows the Ohio Early Learning Standards. So we want to do all that we can to partner with those parents to get them ready for school. And we want to make sure that we are making the best impact that we can and kind of getting our name out there, not just SPARK, but just alternative opportunities. And so I just kind of wondered if the group had done any type of research focusing on that, and if there are any opportunities or thoughts about expanding it in the future here in Columbus.
I know our group hadn't had that direct conversation. It wasn't a particular focus of the research, but as we said some pre-conversation, there were 3 or 4 other things like that we thought it'd be great to learn a whole lot more about it. I agree with you. It's a fantastic intervention for families and a way to fill that gap, and I think it's something that ought to get a lot more. We ought to learn a whole lot more about it.
I was at a national conference a few months ago, and they talked about the home visiting and the impact that it made. And I believe that you're going to speak with her after Lynette regarding the question that she asked. But, I think that they're really great programs and make great impact. The home visiting, of course, yes. But as far as digging into the data, Lynette could assist you more with exactly how that went about.
Terrific. I just want to emphasize, that was not a plant, although it doesn't surprise me. Arisha's very sharp, and she knows that parents are children's first teachers. Sir.
Hi, thank you so much for this wonderful panel. My name is Kyle Strickland. I work with the Kerwin Institute for the Study of Race and Ethnicity. Had great opportunity working on issues of youth vulnerability with the city and also with the county and Director Bivens. But one of the questions that I have really has to do with the sense of urgency around this issue. So, we oftentimes have reports that show these alarming numbers that we see over and over again. But the question that I have is really about, how is it that we as a community can figure out a way to really move the needle and set goals that we can all get behind? And that's something that I'm very interested in, because I think one aspect of it is you set goals. If it's too high and you don't attain them, then that may be a problem for some folks as far as accountability goes. But at some point, we've got to be able to hold ourselves collectively accountable and say that enough is enough. So how would you kind of envision ways for us to really set this urgency? Because these problems are existing and they're only getting worse. So what is it that we can do as a community? I just want to get your thoughts.
So as it relates, Kyle, to step up to quality, because that's one of the most emergent needs, because there's so many, right? So you can't, boil the ocean. But right now, with step up to quality as it relates to where we're at, right? 'Cause again, if today was 2020, 28,000 kids will lose their publicly funded Title 20 slots. The county commissioners will be working with community partners. I don't know if you've seen the commercials that we've been putting out just to raise awareness. We're hoping to bring our community partners, some of them are in this room, I've made phone calls to them, I know I've been stalking them, to have an initial conversation, and then we're gonna blow it up to the community to get out there, to be boots on the ground, knocking on doors, talking to some of our providers, home-based and learning centers, saying, hey, if you're not engaged, why? How can we help you get engaged? So we will keep you informed as it relates to step up to quality, because it sounds like, and we will be setting goals. I don't know how many centers are going to make it to 2020, and I don't know what we can do other than, change the legislation, which I don't see that changing right now, but we will keep you informed on that.
One of the things I'm proud about being in Columbus is that when we see things that are wrong, we get a conscience. We've seen that around infant mortality. We've seen how this community really responds and engages. I think there's a wonderful opportunity for us to get the key players in a room and have a really candid conversation about how we bring our resources together, unify our efforts, and collaborate and get collective impact around this. And I'm hopeful that that will be one of the outcomes, or something like that will be one of the outcomes of this study and this conversation.
And I think having those key stakeholders, but also don't forget about the little people, the people who are doing the work every day and facing the challenges and being able to bring their information together and really be able to paint a clear picture.
And Kyle, in your space that you work in, just real quick, I know that I mentioned this earlier, and I can't reemphasize this enough. When we talk about mentoring, because we've done a lot of studies, right? We've studied the older, we've studied the younger, we're going to study the seniors, we're going to study everybody. But one of the things we can do now is, when you ask what you can do as a community, mentor. Get involved in a kid's life. Get involved in a family's life. Because again, it does not cost to care.
Good afternoon. My name is Sean McKenzie. I'm with the Children's Defense Fund. I had a quick question about Step Up to Quality in the context of the expulsions and suspensions. And I was curious if either by way of data or by way of anecdote in what you're seeing in programs that you're observing, if you're seeing the correlation between, 1 star and high levels of expulsions, suspensions, whatnot. And the context for that is, last year in the state legislature, there was legislation to consider some limitations on suspensions for children in the 3rd grade and lower. There's some interest in that as well now. And as you were speaking, I realized, I don't know that Step Up to Quality has been a part of that conversation as this issue has come back on the table. And so I'm curious if either by way of data or experiences, this is what you're observing, and maybe this ought to be a part of that conversation.
Well, I'll jump in on that. So we work with programs all over Franklin County to respond to centers that call us kind of in crisis mode. The Ohio Department of Mental Health and Addiction Services, along with Nationwide Children's, has created the Ohio Preschool Expulsion Prevention Partnership, which is a hotline that centers can call for a free service to get some short-term support when they're considering expelling a child. And we get centers that have 0 stars to 5 stars. And so we are seeing that the need is great. It is not just the centers who are not star rated or not considered to be of quality. We're seeing centers that have 4 and 5 stars that need just as much support. They have educated teachers, they have high staff, they have qualified staff, they have little turnover. But when it comes to equipping those teachers to manage those behaviors and really bridge the information and awareness of trauma and the awareness of the challenges children have, and to translate into practice in the classroom, that still is a need. And so when we have early child mental health consultants like myself and our team that can go in and support those centers, that's really what we're trying to do to meet that need. I don't have numbers exactly to tell you, but I can tell you anecdotally, we see it across Franklin County, across the quality rating system. And there's not a lot of ways to track that. And so in our school districts and our school systems, we have formal ways to track that. But a parent who's asked repeatedly to come pick their child up, no, that's not expulsion, but if mom has a job where she can't leave, they have to find other places to have childcare. So, expulsion is one term, but we think about those soft expulsions where they no longer have those really true means of childcare. It still is a problem.
We in our different levels of rating that we have in our programs, it's universal. Mom and dad still sometimes, regardless of which center and how good the staff are, refuse to come pick up their child, which sets off a whole litany of other kinds of things that have to be dealt with. I think that's the bigger issue, regardless of the rating that helps to have better educated, more highly qualified people to manage and lead through it. But I think we have to identify we have a deeper, bigger issue. Our folks in the school district, they have to use it as a tool. Teachers have to know. Our teachers have to know that they can draw a line in the sand at some point to create a safe space for all the kids in the program and for the staff that are there. But it's extremely difficult to figure out, no matter how qualified you are, how to manage that dynamic that I just shared.
And it's difficult. They don't want those children to leave.
Right.
They want to keep them in their classroom. They
Yeah.
want to keep them in their centers. But when the burden is so great to the other children and to the teachers, it really is hard to do that.
And I'm glad you asked the question the way you did, because it underscores, I remember the bill in the legislature in the last session, it underscores that there is a difference in the K-12 world and the early childhood world. In K-12, we have a public, free public education, the bedrock of American democracy. And it is a mostly public space. We treat that education as a public good. But in the early childhood space, while schools, Columbus City schools and other schools in our county are important providers of early childhood services, it's primarily a market-based activity. You who had children and have taken them to childcare understand that, right? And so how the legislature approaches fixes in both of those places, and not taking a position on that bill or anything, but is different. It has to take into account the different nature of the public versus private worlds that early childhood crosses.
I would be interested in seeing the data in the neighborhoods, and that's what we're picking apart right now. In certain zip codes, in certain neighborhoods, we know that there are going to be higher number of early learning centers who are not Step Up to Quality certified. And I'm interested in seeing, once we really extract that, I have a team working on that right now, seeing what that really looks like.
Well, this forum has certainly given us a lot to think about. We encourage you to continue the conversation with coffee and cookies that are in the back against the lovely backdrop of the downtown. You can view and share today's forum and all of our forums on CTV Columbus Television, on WOSU and PBS affiliates statewide through the Ohio Channel, and anytime on CMC's website via YouTube. Let's thank our sponsors, PNC, and our speakers, Joy Bivens, Steve Ives, Lisa Golden, Eric Karolak, and Lynette Cook. And thanks to all of you for being here. See you next week.